I'd like to welcome everybody to the American Cannabis. I'm your host, Ellis Smith, and I'd like to thank presenters Cannabis Tech for allowing us to host this webcast today. And our topic is Cannabis Facility Design, Get Built and Licensed Quickly. And today we've got the founders of MERJ Architecture, Nicole Delmage and Satto Rugg. Thank you both for coming on today. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ellis.
So ACC does quite a bit of work with MERJ, and they help us with a lot of our design work, whether it's cultivation, dispensary, and extraction, and just have a great working relationship with them. And as I was telling them before we got on this webcast, that I almost went to architecture school, really looked at this closely as a young man, and so working with them on designing these facilities for all these projects is fulfilling a lifelong dream of mine to be able to get to kind of dabble in this and pretend that I'm designing, even though I'm not really doing any of the heavy lifting. I'm just giving my input. So this is a topic to me that I'm very passionate about. I was exposed to working with the Northern Colorado U.S. Greenville Council. I used to do video production for a lot of their projects to document, how they were LEED certified, and so something I've been exposed to and excited to work on. And so this is a big topic to me that I'm excited to share with our audience today. And I welcome you guys to come in today and really share what you have done in the cannabis space, how you actually got in the cannabis space, and really hopefully, give some good insight to our audience of what it takes to really come up with an idea and concept, put it on paper, design it, and bring it to life. So that being said, let's kind of dive in here. I'd like to get some background information on you two. First, so our audience knows, how you got into architecture and what led you into cannabis. So Nicole, if you would, please just give me a little background on what led you to where you are today and how you got into architecture. Nicole, I'm not sure if you're on mute or not, but I'm not hearing you there.
Thank you. I had a very grassroots start to architecture. I was a tree planter in northern British Columbia, and I got a promotion to being the person who got to set up camp. So I decided where the solar showers were located and where the cook hut would be and the Quonset hut for reading. And at one point during my career as a tree planter, I decided that manual labor was not for me for the long term. And how did I get to set up camp every single day? So eventually I looked at architecture as being my ticket to being able to do that, setting up camp every day. And since then, I've been engaged in a multidisciplinary practice, so institutional and recreational, residential, commercial architecture. And my intro to cannabis was a past client who I designed a home for, was getting into the cultivation and extraction business and brought me along. And the exciting aspect of that is that as a lifelong learner, this gave me an opportunity to have a very steep learning curve and learn about a lot of new technology and a lot of new processes that were new to me. And now that we are in it, we really value the fact that it's a fast-moving, exciting industry where we get to continually learn with our clients. So that's my story.
Great, thank you. Satto, tell me your background. I haven't heard this before, so I'm glad to hear Nicole's background. I didn't know a lot of this, so please share with us.
Okay. I had my upbringing was in a family that had 5 generations in a manufacturing business, a small New England factory and lumberyard, and I learned about materials for building and also just how to fabricate things. So that was kind of what I was steeped in. And at a certain point in my late 20s, I decided I really wanted to develop the creative side. And similar to Nicole, I was a woodworker at that point. And while I loved the work, I realized that wasn't going to carry me where I wanted to go. So I put the two together and I said, well, what can I do to build things and work with my mind and be in the arts? And architecture is what came up. And it's been a wonderful ride since 1993. I've been working in the architecture field and really enjoy this opportunity, as Nicole was mentioning, to come into a new industry, which is really is full of it's a new paradigm, is what we said when we first saw it. This is a new way of looking at a product that has been repressed for so long and now is coming out to market, and how do people relate to that, and how does design and architecture help enrich the experience for people who want to use this medicine and this plant. So we're really happy to be in this business.
Great, thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, so we've kind of got this webcast broken down into 3 components today, and it's really the cultivation design and workflow efficiency component, the importance of safety and extraction and process design, and then the third one will be dispensary and customer experience. So I want to dive into this first topic with the cultivation design and workflow efficiency. And if you would, Satto, walk me through kind of your process. How do you guys, as a client comes to you and has this idea, how do you vet them? How do you understand what they want to achieve, and how do you kind of get through that whole process to bring this to life? If you would, walk me through some of that process and the thinking and what you guys do.
Okay. Yeah, as you mentioned, we design all different aspects of the cannabis business. So we design the cultivation facilities, indoor cultivation, outdoor cultivation, greenhouses, extraction, processing, also testing laboratories and dispensaries. And each one of those is a very different approach. But even within, say, a cultivation operation, from one company to another, there may be completely different growing methodologies, how they treat the plants and what the growing cycles are, and whether they're propagating with mother plants or with tissue culture, for instance. So we really work with the client. Before we start with anything, we start working with the client and find out what their process is, what the particularities of that is, and then often the second part is starting with the existing building that they're starting with. Very few people are building from scratch. If they are, makes it easier for everybody, but often there's a building that we have to adapt to a new use. And so we put those two together, and then this diagram that is up on the screen is really about our approach to process flow. So the most important thing, one of the most important things in a production facility will be how materials enter the space, storage areas, and then how they flow through the production process, and then grow process that may be from mother to clone to veg to flower rooms. And once that process is done, is there a drying and a curing process? And after that, there might be an extraction process, and where is the product going to be shipped out? So we really this is a flow diagram for a particular 2-story application where we really needed to look at people, maximizing the efficiency of the process for the company, and keeping people from tripping over each other, and making sure everything has its proper space. That's kind of a nutshell approach.
In this
and I'd like to add.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nicole. Sorry about that.
Oh, I was going to add that sometimes we look at the end game, what kind of throughput or goal is the business model based on, and then we did go backwards from there to understand whether or not the building, the space can support that goal of, at the end of the day, having this particular quantity and product come out the doors.
And then as you look at this particular workflow in this building, every space that we go into is so different. Even with this one, you've got 2 stories you've got to deal with, and understanding this is a very, very large production capacity in this space as well. They've got quite a bit of extraction going on, and so the layout and the understanding of that workflow for every project varies so much, knowing that this one you've got two different levels you've got to go up and down. And so it's not easy playing this game of Tetris to really understand, what makes the most sense. It's quite a bit of work and effort to really lay this out, understand the workflow, and understand the efficiencies behind it. And so working with you guys and seeing this workflow, this was the first time I had seen this with a particular design, and I really love having this ability to truly lay out the functions and playing through it in real time and seeing, okay, let's adjust this, let's adjust that to make sure that we can make the workflow be the most efficient and effective. So that exercise for me was what really solidified my long-term relationship with you guys when I saw you create this a long time ago for me. So I like this component, and it really starts to kind of how the rest of the facility is going to be laid out and functioning. And so I want to understand, as we look at these different building types, and not all buildings are built the same. Some are metal, some are made out of wood, some are made with drywall and wood studs, some are tilt wall. All of these different types of materials can really impact the overall design and function of the space as well. And we've seen that a lot of the tilt walls in a lot of areas are poor vapor barriers, and understanding that they don't necessarily make it easy for us to make a good, strong building envelope. And so starting from those initial pieces, that leads into how the rest of the facility is going to be laid out and designed. And so I want to kind of go into lighting methodology and some of the ancillary spaces. There's so much stuff that we've got to look at in a grow facility that cannot be overlooked. And working with a team like you really helps us make sure we don't miss any of these functions. And so understanding lighting methodology alone plays a big factor in a lot of the technology going into this space. And so going through these processes, these questionnaires, and really nailing down all the details from the client is super imperative so that we make sure we don't miss any of this. And so we also like to design around clean and dirty zones. And if you see on the slide that's presented, we are really trying to limit access into cultivation space versus outside of anywhere having to do with the plants. For us, people are the major contamination. We want to prevent them from coming into the space if we don't have to have them, and really limiting only the grow team in that area. And then as you see the workflow when they come into that area, we really require them to come in and take a shower, change their clothes, and really go into that space knowing that they have gone through a contamination process. And so do you guys see a lot of these decontamination chambers and design and build that you're doing? And if so, kind of what are some of the options from air showers to regular showers to just even changing rooms?
In this facility, we went through a process that's really similar to what you described, Ellis. When you come into the building, on the lower floor, there is a staff area where you are expected to leave your outdoor clothes and bags in a place where that doesn't get pulled into any of the workspaces. Once you've changed or gowned into your work clothing, you would go upstairs to the second floor. We really isolated the cultivation area on the second floor in a really intentional way, because when you come up into this space through an elevator or stairs, there is a decontamination zone where you can be air showered off. You have foot mats where anything on your footwear they're sticky, so that gets taken off the bottom of your shoes. And then you walk into the workspace, and anytime you leave, you have to re-enter through that process of kind of getting any contamination off of your person. And likewise, materials come up through that same process. Even if you're bringing up soils or growing matter, it would come up through the elevator, have a decontamination area, and then be brought into storage on the grow level, so that you're limiting your risk as much as possible. That's the real goal.
It is, and that's exactly right.
I'll add.
I'm sorry. Go ahead there, Satto.
Sorry, Ellis. I would just add that we have, besides the kind of flow characteristics and space layout, we often use mechanical systems to assist. So an obvious version is the air shower, where you walk into a room and basically the grid ceiling and the grid floor where the air just flows over you and at a high volume and it takes dust and particles off of your clothing. But also within the flower rooms, for instance, within a grow room, we may set up the heating, ventilating, air conditioning system such that there's a slight positive pressure in that room. Whenever you go into that room, you actually open the door and the air will be coming out instead of sucking any contaminants in. Or we have an airlock, simple double door situation where you can get cleaned off. So all these strategies can fit together.
Okay. And as we kind of get through those initial kind of layouts and function and workflow, as we get to the cultivation space and the room layout, this particular space, we really designed it around a certain amount of grow rooms to have a perpetual cycle. And we had to have a certain amount of vegetative space to support the flowering space based off of a certain growing methodology. And what was fun about this project is the client asked us at one point, he said, can you tell me if I were to grow a different methodology or even the current methodology, if it makes more sense for us to have flowering rooms and veg rooms, or does it make more sense to have veg in place and not move them into a flowering room and just touch the plant one time? And working backwards and looking at that information, it made sense for this size and scale for this client to actually veg in space, knowing that he has a short vegetative time and doesn't have a lot of transplants going on with this growing methodology. And through that process, it really allowed us to look at this through a different perspective and understand that the original layout made sense for one growing methodology, but for another, it didn't make sense. And so we were able to adjust that and really maximize. I believe we got an extra about 12 or 1,300 pounds just by doing that, and we saved a lot of money on labor. We're not having to move plants. And for me, that's what's fun about this work, is really looking at the workflow, understanding what makes the most sense, and maximizing it so we can be profitable. And so as we get to kind of that workflow in those rooms, you also have to play into the nutrient methodology. Are you using any type of fertigation system, RO water? How do we design those rooms to support that type of technology in these spaces as well? And so that can dictate aisles, that can dictate a number of benches in a room. If you're going vertical, these things can limit you, as well as the type of heating and cooling systems in these spaces as well, as that may reduce some of our ceiling height with some of these things coming down and obstructing our use. And so how does all that play into our design as well as we look at these other things that impact the way we design?
I think that you used a really... Go ahead, Satto.
Sorry. I was just going to say, Nicole, that we were really excited when we met Ellis and the American Cannabis team. On an early project, Nicole had come up with an algorithm, basically, that looked at the growing process and the various stages of the growing process and cycles and plant output and crunched all the numbers such that we could come out with a space diagram that would work for the various different growing rooms. And when we met Ellis, we were overjoyed because he thought the same way and had even more advanced algorithms and actually understood the plant, the various different plant growing technologies that were out there even better. And so as a team, we really could take it to the next level on this project, for instance, where we're looking at multiple vertical tiers. And yeah, it's just really, really exciting to take the goals of a company and be able to break it down with an algorithm into a collection of spaces that can then be designed. Go ahead, Nicole.
Just to tag on to that, when we worked on a really small facility, Ellis was talking about how putting the plant in a container one time and going through all phases of the growth cycle in that container made sense in this large facility when we ran the numbers. But in a really tight, small facility, we did sort of a similar exercise where we realized that having the plants in veg in a smaller container and replanting them at different phases actually allowed them to use the square footage they had to best effect. And so it's great to be able to see where it works in different contexts optimally. And then sort of going on to another part of what Ellis was talking about, the complexity of the decisions that have to be made to get the space to work with the growing process. I think one of the most important things that we like to start with is understanding what are called the set points in a room. And those set points can be anything from temperature to humidity to height requirements, just sort of a baseline, a set of goals that help us, that will be our baseline and our touch points from moving the design forward. Once we can narrow down some of the variables, then the process starts to get a lot easier because the variables do have such a big impact on space requirements. So if the lights, for example, have to lower and lift again for a particular growing methodology, that has a big impact on space compared to just setting the lights at one level once and they never move. That's just another example of how we have to work with those spaces.
And that's what makes this so fun in my eyes, is people don't realize how much we nerd out on these things to really understand how do we maximize that production per square foot in these facilities. It really is getting down to, to putting together these numbers, these algorithms, and really making sense of it all, because at the end of the day, these things are very, very large investments, and these folks want to get their ROI as soon as they can out of this, and it's really up to us to ensure that we have maximized that space for that use for them. And so, we're held to a high standard from people that hire us to do this, so it's a lot of fun to have to go through these exercises. And so as we look at this, there's so many different methodologies of building grow facilities in, and indoor is definitely the most expensive, especially retrofitting. Some of these buildings aren't meant to really hold plants and the high humidity that's required in these things, so there's quite a bit of cost that goes into this. And then greenhouses. We know that greenhouses are a lot more cost effective to get into, and there's kind of the pros and cons behind both. And so with that being said, what do you like? What do you recommend? What do you prefer to customers and clients that they come to you wanting to know the best solution?
I think that I'll just start by...
Nicole, go ahead. You go.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that starting with one of your comments about existing buildings and retrofitting them to have an envelope, which means walls and roof and good containment that really functions, that is a real challenge, an architectural, technological challenge to make sure that the envelope can hold temperatures, can hold airflow, and not create problems due to poor insulation like condensation that could lead to mold growth or pest problems. So in some ways, I want to say we would love, if we're doing an indoor grow, to build new and to build process-specific buildings that are intended to be used for grows. And that's sort of why going to a greenhouse starts to make more sense. And I'll let Satto take it from there, maybe.
I love that question because I have a very strong background in solar energy, and that comes from a longer life commitment to doing things that are really good for the planet. So my view is that if there is a way for us to advance the outdoor and greenhouse growing technologies to the point where the yields can start to equal indoor. I mean, the advantage of indoor is usually that you can get a better yield on an annual basis because you can grow all winter. And I just think that in the end, if we can move everything out and use sunlight and start to reduce some of the extreme energy loads that come from indoor growing. That's the way I'd like to push it. And of course, we work for businesses that have a bottom line, so this is what constrains us. But our one of our interests is really to develop the architectural side and the mechanical side so that we can make this make sense and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels in this process.
I'm glad to hear you make that point. You know, as I said, I worked with the U.S. Green Belt Council where I documented a lot of LEED projects, and I think it's very important that we do gravitate out of the indoor settings, getting to the greenhouses. These are plants, utilizing Mother Nature at what she's good at. That sunshine is powerful, and really reducing that carbon footprint. We are trying to do, at least it is one of my goals as well, Satto, to if I do indoors grows, how do I lean on folks like yourself and what's available to us on technology to really try to reduce that carbon footprint indoors? Because one, it's sustainable. Two, it allows us to be competitive with the greenhouse growers. And so we have been turning to LED lighting. We have been looking at ways to reuse some of the wastewater coming off, whether it's from the condensate recapture, whether it's coming out of the dehumidifiers. And really just trying to look at any ways we can implement, LEED techniques, whether we're using energy-efficient cooling systems. I'm always encouraging higher R value in these indoor builds so that we can, get that thermal mass and rely on that efficiency in the cooling space as well. And so this is a topic for me that I think really needs to be addressed because we are using a lot of power. We are carbon heavy, and any way we can reduce that over time is going to be more sustainable for our industry, obviously, but for our environment too.
One of the aspects of the growing process that I find really interesting, and I'm kind of changing directions because the next slide shows just a concept layout of a tissue culture component to an indoor grow or an outdoor grow where there might be a head house attached to a greenhouse where you could manage either your mothers, your clones, or the tissue culture part of the process. And I just wanted to point out that when each room has its own specific needs when it comes to performance, growing, making sure that everybody, including the plants, are happy. And this little diagram, when we started working on this with actually Mitch Day from Ellis's organization, we started to learn that the HVAC, the flow of air through this grouping of rooms is really critical to this piece working. So when we're looking at outdoor grows, we still have an indoor need that would be adjacent to support that process. And this little diagram just demonstrates that these rooms are potentially necessary and they're an accessory to an outdoor grow where you're not simply farming or growing, you also have these other amenities that are really important to the overall outdoor grow organization.
Great point there. I haven't touched on the micropropagation tissue culture slide here, and so I'm glad you brought that up. And for us, this was micropropagation is really imperative at a certain scale in cannabis production. If you're not at a certain production capacity, this might not make sense. On this project, we got through 90% of the design and realized, okay, this is such a huge volume of production. This type of technology made sense to come in here and really manage this for the long-term sustainability of the business. And so, as you're mentioning, yes, this can work great for this particular project, which was indoors. This can easily be bolted onto a head house for a greenhouse production, as well as putting together stock to go outdoors as well. And you'll see that no matter what methodology you're growing, you'll still have these units that are specialized in different temperatures, humidities, to manage different processes for us. This is a very fun component to this design, was adding in this last piece for this project, that's for sure. All right, I'm gonna switch gears and move on now to extraction. You know, we could probably talk for 4 hours on cultivation, but let's move through this next component here on the extraction and processing design. And this is a whole other can of worms. I specialize in growing the plant. As we get to the extraction side, this is a whole another level of building codes, a whole other level of security and safety. And so shed some light on this component and the complexities that really go into this.
I can start. The extraction is a big piece, and there are some relatively simple and straightforward extraction processes that do not use a lot of hazardous chemicals. Do not use a lot of flammable gas or liquids, but those are in the minority at this point, and they usually are smaller scale. So a lot of people are using butane, a lot of people are using ethanol in large quantities, and some of the facilities we work on are very large quantities of materials. And the first thing you run into in that is the building codes and fire codes. And rightfully so, the authorities are going to be paying a lot of attention to your extraction process. They will be going through it with a fine-tooth comb. They will be all over any kind of inconsistencies in your design, and they will be looking for building safety to make sure the architecture will support and protect in the event of a fire or a hazardous situation. Even CO2 can be dangerous. You know, it will accumulate and be very dangerous to human habitation. So all kinds of systems have to be installed to be alarm systems and to evacuate air and make the place safe if there was some kind of leak. So this is a lot of what we deal with extraction and post-processing, is satisfying the local jurisdiction and the international building codes, and trying to make the building safe for everybody. It's a very important piece. Yeah.
Yeah, to tell a story about a client who is doing a very large extraction facility. They were vetting different potential properties to purchase for the process, and we were part of that process early on to confirm that the buildings as they existed could meet the code. And in one example, we were looking at a building and realizing that it was a game of testing the square footages, the quantities of hazardous materials that were going to be in the building. And what we learned was that we needed a portion of the building to be structurally separate so that if a hazardous event happened, that portion of the building could collapse separately from the other side of the building, thereby not pulling down or destroying a part of the building where human safety was also very important. So we walked away from that building because the process to retrofit it for that structural separation was astronomically expensive. And we ended up finding a building that was already separated structurally, just almost by luck, to be honest with you, and we're able to move forward with a different structure. So one of the things that we get involved with is helping people make sure that when they are leasing or buying a facility, that they can do what they want to do in that facility.
You don't realize how much of that groundwork goes into even just looking at a building before you even actually put a design to it. And this goes to show you how critical it is to hire the experts. Make sure you go out and do your homework. I would hate to see someone go buy a building or lease one to later find out that they cannot use it for their specific use. And trust me, these things happen all the time. And so for all of our audience listeners, make sure you get your experts. Bring in the right architects. Find industrial hygienists, chemists, scientists that have experience in this. They're going to give you the guidance to ensure that you protect your investment, because if not, you could definitely be wasting some money, as I know I've seen a few do, and as we just heard, if you don't cover your bases, you'll be making some mistakes. So make sure you get with the experts. And I'm going to give a little shout out here to a gentleman, Jim Lieberman. He runs a company called THC Safety. He offers classes and courses for industry professionals or people wanting to get into the space, and he's got all different levels from introduction to advanced courses. I know you guys work with Jim as well. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. We have worked with him.
He's a great guy, so I know he's busy and he is always up to something unique. But check if you're in our audience and looking to learn more about just extraction in general, check out Jim Lieberman's website at THC Safety and look to see what he has to offer. Because when I went and took his course, it was really eye-opening for me to understand the true importance of hiring professionals, bringing in the experts, and knowing my limitations and not trying to have the attitude that I can do this without anyone's help. This is very dangerous. The videos and the exercises that you see in his class are really, they hit home to show you that you better do the job properly. Else you're not going to get approved, and the fire department will shut you down, that is for sure. And as we look at the extraction side, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to add that some jurisdictions require that you have an industrial hygienist or a safety engineer prepare a report, and that is exactly what Jim does. And he takes that report process very rigorously and does an amazing job as sort of as a team member, aside from being an educator.
And for our audience members, I did a webcast back with Jim back in March of 2018, and you can find that on our website as well, and cannabistech.com. So check that out. As we look at the cost per square foot, too, on the extraction versus a regular cultivation design or the cultivation build-out as well as the dispensary build-out, the extraction is the most expensive, and you're going to spend well over $350 a square foot, if not more, depending on the technology you put in there. And as you guys look at this, what do you feel is easier to build? Something with CO2 or something with butane? What do you prefer, and what do you think is easier to get through a building department and get approved from?
I would say
Definitely.
CO2 is the
yeah, go ahead.
CO2.
Yeah, we have the same answer.
Okay.
Go ahead, Nicole.
And why is that? Just because it's not as volatile, it's not as...
Yes, it's because there aren't any flammable or explosive materials involved. CO2 is, if you get a CO2 leak, it can adversely affect humans, and you want to have a plan in place for alarms that measure or devices that measure the parts per million of CO2 in the air, so that you have a plan for getting people out of the building if there is a leak. And there is a whole code compliant process around alarms and strobe lights, and having a plan of action, an SOP for how to, or emergency plan on how to get out of the building. And but that's the flip side, is that there's much fewer regulations around. Fire department is not as concerned, and there aren't the same firewall, rated wall regulations around CO2 areas. So the building itself is simpler, the code is simpler, and getting your safety measures in place is pretty straightforward, whereas extraction with butane and ethanol is a different story.
A very different story. But from what I've been learning, the cost to build out these spaces are pretty similar, though, after it's all said and done, even though they both require two different sets of parameters to follow. And so that's what was interesting for me to kind of learn through a project we just did here in Aurora, Colorado, that even though they're two very separate rooms When you go into the butane extraction room, you know, there's closed glass that separates you from the machine. If you look at the cameras, they're mounted in a very secure case for explosives. Versus you go into the CO2 room, there's light switches everywhere and regular cameras, and it's not as sophisticated. And so you feel like you're in a very different space when you walk into a butane versus a CO2 room. But to learn that they both cost the same relatively, that was pretty eye-opening for me to understand that, even though they both are two separate processes to get through to get approval.
Ellis, could I add to that? I totally agree. I think there are a few things like the explosive environment, trying to call it a C1D1 environment. It's actually an electrical designation, but that will be required for certain butane equipment, whereas it isn't for CO2. However, I think it's true that they cost the same or close to the same in small applications, but once you scale up, that may not be true, because then what Nicole was talking about comes into play, which is that the building really becomes a factor. The fire safety requires that the building is built out of certain materials and they have to be fireproofed, and you're going to have a sprinkler system anyway, and probably in any case, but there's a lot more attention to that, and that can actually lead into costs that would actually prevent you from using a certain building. But yeah, small operations, it really is about the size. There's actually, the code measures the amount of hazardous material that you're going to be using in process and how much you're going to have in storage. And if you go over that limit, that's where the break point is.
Now something new to me working with you guys on one project where we're looking at understanding that limitation of how much volume material you can hold on site at any given time. And I think this lays into, again, before any of you folks wanting to get into the extraction side of the industry, hire the professionals and make sure you're asking all these questions up front before you make any commitments, because you may not be able to get operational and get to business if you do not, check these boxes and do your due diligence. So great point there. I appreciate that. Anything else you guys want to make any comments here on extraction before we wrap this up and move on to the dispensary side?
I think that the only thing I would add.
Go ahead. We have a little bit of time lag here. That's why we're stumbling. Go ahead, Nicole.
That's all good. No worries.
Satto, go ahead. We'll go to the next slide and say what you had on your mind.
Actually, I was going to go to the slide and let you talk about it, but I'll just quickly say that that we've talked about extraction, we've talked about cultivation, we're going to talk about dispensaries in a moment, but there are combinations of all three. In fact, we did a little bit of preliminary work on a combination which was going to be a dispensary and an extraction facility, which is an odd combination. But sometimes everything gets packed into one building, and this is an example of an early version of a project that had a testing lab. So I just want to mention testing labs and research labs. Testing laboratories are usually state mandated testing. That's how their business model works, and they would be separate from a facility, but often a company that is very interested in product quality or in product innovation, including the cultivation innovation and purity of their plant strains, and maybe researching terpenes and things like that, they will have a research lab, and that is another highly technical, highly controlled environment and this is now coming to light in the fact that the international trade is starting up. And once you go international, you're going to be dealing with standards of GMP processes and regulations that foreign countries generally require. They will not allow your product out of the country unless you have proven that your facility meets these GMP standards. And that leads directly back into architecture and the design of the space, because we have to take care of everything from measuring particulates in the air if you're going for an ISO level rated testing lab or a clean room within the testing lab. The mechanical systems are all important. The type of floor you have and the type of walls you have and keeping a clean space are very important. And keeping airlocks and keeping other contaminants out. And then all the machine requirements. You're having very highly sensitive technical testing machines that will have specific electrical and ventilation requirements and all that. So just another piece that fits into the cannabis picture. Nicole, do you have anything to add about that?
I think the only thing I would add is that once you have all these parts and pieces in the same space, in this example, we show this this room that is the entry room that has multi-functions, and it gives guests an opportunity to see into the flower room, the clone room, the mother room, the research lab without actually entering those spaces. And what we try to provide is an opportunity for people to engage with what you're doing without necessarily having to go into the space. That's been a requirement or a request from a lot of our clients. And in this particular example, they also wanted to have the ability to have a classroom setting or a presentation space, because as Satto was saying, that when it comes to research, sometimes the opportunities for presenting that research inside a space that actually produces the product could be an exciting pairing. So education can be a part of this planning process from our point of view.
Great point. And we'll touch on another slide here that combines the dispensary and extraction here. We'll get to that here in a few minutes, and we can kind of touch on those marriages as well with the retail experience and the extraction kind of being a part of that as well. So as we kind of move on here then to the dispensary component here, I look at this in two perspectives, what I call the front of the house and the back of the house. Front of the house obviously being the whole customer experience. What's it like coming to the door, ordering product, and then leaving? And obviously the back of the house is what's it like for the employees that work there? How does product intake happen? How does inventory management and storage and control processes happen? And then even during the daily workflow, how do you keep the shelves stocked with inventory if supply gets low? And then in the night, how do these folks close this thing down with an ease of workflow? They're not having to empty all the shelves and stock them back in the morning. And so the dispensary component is a whole other can of worms. It's really bringing in the retail concept, but also the inventory management component. And so walk us through kind of your dispensary process here. ACC had an opportunity to work with you guys on creating a satellite American Cannabis Company store shape and design. And this design that you see here is part of that. And so this was an awesome experience for my team as well as myself to work with you guys to start from our initial concept to what you've got us to today. So walk us through that process so our audience can kind of see, how you worked with us and how we kind of came to this layout and kind of what the next steps are.
I can begin if that's okay.
You begin, Nicole.
I was just going to, since Satto really was he had the initial design concept, I'm just going to talk about our process, and then I'll let him talk about the design. Cool. Our process with ACC, we do a 4-step design process where the first step is we're listening and looking at images that come from the client, where we just want to absorb what the goals are, how the dispensary expresses their ideas or vision or mission around selling marijuana or other products. And so that first meeting is just information in, we're just absorbing. And then the second meeting is an opportunity for us to reflect back what we heard and to add to it. So we bring additional imagery and ideas so that we're basically building a language that a visual language that everyone can see, and you can nod and say, yes, that's what I meant. So it's a really fun process for us to get to know our clients and also to get to learn how to express new ideas clearly. And then the third step, which is the step that you are seeing here, is where we start putting those ideas into action. We plan it. We do a space plan that maps out the space, and it also starts to incorporate the design ideas that are unique to that particular client or that particular space that sets them apart and also that tells their story. And our next step, which we are working on currently, will be to do the fancy $1 million model that shows what it will actually look like. And so stay tuned for that. And I'll let Satto talk a little bit about the design idea that we came up with for ACC.
Okay, I just first want to mention that it's not really a $1 million model. That is a figure of speech. So don't worry. Yeah, this really every client is going to have a different approach, and that's the beauty of it. This is an opportunity in retail. This is really the retail end of it. It's really an opportunity for the company that is representing the product to get their mission and their vision across, and that is going to actually be expressed in the design of the space, in the colors and the materials, the transparency or the solidity of the components in the space. And in this case, and also in the intention for how the retail experience is going to be used in terms of a flow process, in terms of security, in terms of how the bud tenders or employees interact with the client. And in this case, there's a requirement for a lobby so that people are checked in and go through a security check, and then can have an experience while they're waiting to be waited on by the employees. And we wanted to, you can see some crazy wall going on in there, and that's really about a lot of that wall is transparent. It's about creating a transparency, enough of a transparency between the waiting experience and the actual retail experience, so that you are enticed and you have something interesting to look forward to. And also on the lobby side, that there's a nice comfortable area to sit, and there are educational displays, and there are things that engage your attention so you don't feel that you're just wasting your time. So this is really where this design came about, and it develops with the client. We do a back and forth process where we have already, as Nicole mentioned, looked at their thinking process and how they feel about how they want the customer to feel when they walk in the space, and we try to create an experience that will fulfill that. And then the rest of the design is really about a lot about logistics. The back of the house is about allowing as much space as possible for the retail while giving an adequate space for the employees to work, for product fulfillment to occur, a safe and secure vault for the product to be stored at night, and then the process of crossing that barrier between back of house and front of house. How does the product get passed through? Do the employees walk back and get the product? Is there a delivery system? We've seen all kinds of things, including bank teller delivery canisters that send this stuff up, which can be fun, but it's really about making sure that it's a well-oiled machine, that all the product can flow easily, and that people aren't sitting around waiting. There's a nutshell of it. Dispensary design is one of the more fun things we do, because we do get to play with the visuals and the experience, really create an environment for a positive experience for the client and the employees. That's it.
What I enjoy.
I think too.
Oh, go ahead, Nicole. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that the process flow is something that we try and we map it out very carefully in a very logical way when it comes to products being delivered. It's like we talked about initially with the Cultivation Center, the product's delivered, who checks it in, who does quality control, where is it put initially, and then how does it go through all the steps of until it's purchased and goes out the door. And I'll leave it at that. Ellis, go ahead.
Yeah, what I really enjoyed about our process with you guys is you asked a lot of questions that I didn't have answers for, and it made me go out and do my homework. Sure, living in Colorado, there's dispensaries on every corner. We've got more dispensaries than Starbucks and McDonald's combined, I believe. And still, I couldn't answer the questions knowing I've shopped in hundreds of these things. And so you helped me understand going out and looking at all the different dispensary processes and what I liked, what I didn't like, and helped me understand, coming back to you, here's the customer experience I want to give, and really understanding that by going out and doing my homework. And you really drove me to do that homework, and that's what I liked about this. You challenged me. You really asked questions and made sure that this is well thought out, and that's the most important component here is this is a retail experience. You don't want to miss a beat. You want to maintain that customer for life if you can, and the only way by doing it is by earning that trust from day one they come in and keeping that consistent experience when they come in time and time again. So you really just, through your process, helped me, do my homework to ensure that we were thinking and not just doing. And so that was what was quite a bit of fun. And so
I think that if I was going to suggest that we move to the next slide so that we can just talk about the hybrid facility for a moment. The next slide shows a dispensary that has all the same components as the one that we worked on with ACC, but it also has a small extraction facility. And the extraction facility, you'll see that there's darker green equipment zones shown in two of the rooms. That it's a small enough facility that we're not highly regulated, as we talked about for the really large facilities. But the process here is that once the product comes into the facility, it'll go through an extraction process, but we have to have enough room for packaging and just adding some components that make sure that these two uses fit together well.
Yeah, for us it was about making this an attraction. How do we make the dispensary experience go above and beyond our competitors? And with this particular client and partner of ACC's, this was a lot of fun to kind of put the two in the same space. And you see this quite a bit, actually, in all markets where people have commingled these uses. Some are using all three. I'll give a shout out to Seed & Smith here in Colorado. They've got a great little facility here that you can tour through. They actually offer tours, so call them up. And you can see they host a dispensary with extraction and cultivation. And they have a viewing window in the dispensary so you can see some of the extraction processes and the cultivation process. And so for us, it was fun to be able to create this kind of destination, I'll call it, for a dispensary, being unique in its own way. And this is, once again, part of that creative process that's fun to understand how do we elevate that customer experience. And this is something we feel can create that attraction and bring people to because they may have never seen this before. This is a lot of fun.
In this case, there's the yellow represents the areas where the customer is allowed to be, and the yellow space in the middle of the layout is a classroom or a viewing area that was intentionally created as flex space that could be used by the dispensary at times and then used by the public at times.
Yeah, you can see how we can, you can use these spaces in any way you'd like to, and this is the fun part about really understanding how do you differentiate your business, how do you separate yourself from your competitors. Doing these kinds of things can really make you stand out. And so with that being said, we've got a minute or two here before we're up with our time. I want to just kind of wrap this up here today. We kind of went through a lot of content. We could have spent hours and hours on each topic here as they can both go so granular and so deep. But just as some parting words, would you guys like to wrap up and say anything to our audience?
Nicole is waiting for you this time.
Go ahead.
No, why don't you go ahead? This is a dispensary that you were heavily involved in, and you just comment on the last slide.
Yeah, sure. This front of house image shows two things. One, in the background, you see a metal sculptural wall that was an opportunity for the dispensary to bring in a local artist to create a piece that they felt would really speak to their clientele. And in this case, it's motorcycle gears and parts composed into a transparent wall. And then that's kind of like a very not rustic, but tactile and interesting texture. And then the display wall then is very slick and has little nooks for displaying specific products or specific groupings of products. And what I would say about this part of the project is that having some expertise around merchandising or product placement, you can create a great place, a great space that really speaks to people, but then when you put the product in it, you're in a unique situation where you can't put marijuana on the floor for clients to pick up and smell. You have to do that with your bud tender at the point of sale. But in this case, how do you display the product or educate about the product to the best effect? And in this case, this wall seasonally changes products and seasonally changes color, and it's a sort of a rustic and a slick composition put together. I think that and then there's another. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if we could, is this Medicine Man? Can we give a shameless plug for people to go see this in Thornton, Colorado? Is that what this is?
That is what it is. Yes, it's a 4,000 square foot, a 4,000 square foot dispensary that is their flagship store, and it's a fun space to visit.
It's beautiful. So I'd really have our audience go check it out. We went over there and did a field trip, and it took us 20 minutes to get to the counter to purchase because we were just enjoying our time looking at all of the details that you guys did and just the space in general. And just the experience overall was very enjoyable. And so if anybody has a chance when they're in Colorado or live here, go check this place out and see their work. It is phenomenal.
Thank you.
And that last
the final slide. Yeah. In this slide, it's the back of house. This is the employee area. They do their staff meetings here, and that television screen on the wall will be programmed to have specials so that the staff knows what's going on that day in the store. And just a nice place. There's some natural light coming from windows you can't see in the photo, some color, a good place for staff to be and feel like the company's taking care of them while they're working hard taking care of the company.
That looks beautiful too, even though that's just kind of a back of the house kind of meeting room. That's a great looking space. It's inspiring, and you want your staff to be in a space like that welcomes them. It's warm. They can get the information they need for their day to day, and yeah, it's just a very welcoming place like that. Okay, well, any closing remarks, and we wrap this up here? Any closing comments y'all like to do to speak to our audience on?
I'll just say that I really think this is a wonderful business opportunity. That now that basically the country is undergoing a paradigm shift when they're accepting a plant medicine, and this is how I look at it. That has been repressed for 100 years or so. And it's a real opportunity to help people out. And design is just it's just a part of it, and we're happy to be part of making this new industry happen. That's all I really have to say.
I agree. I agree that this is, from an architectural perspective, we talk about building types. You know, you recognize a church and you recognize a school, and we're really interested in what is it about the different facilities that are for cannabis that makes them unique and special. And, you know, selfishly, that's about my goal to design great spaces and great buildings. But I think that for people who are in the industry, contributing to the community by making buildings, I know that buildings for cannabis have to be very inward-looking because transparency laws around windows and being able to see in. There's a way to get around that and make these buildings being amazing and participate in your neighborhood. And I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about, is because it's new, and how do we do that in a way that's really exciting.
Well, great. Nicole, Satto, thank you both for coming on today and speaking to our audience. I'd also like to thank Cannabis Tech for allowing us to host these webcasts. I'm Ellis Smith, your host from American Cannabis Company. To our audience, these webcasts will be available in a week or so on AmericanCannabisConsulting.com website, as well as the CannabisTech.com website. We appreciate everyone tuning in. And once again, Nicole, Satto, thank you both for coming on today. Everyone have a wonderful rest of their week, and we'll see you next time at American Cannabis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice.
Thanks, Ellis.